Hello again, guys, and welcome to the Stay Happy podcast, brought to you by JFR.PRODUCTIONS. I'm your vlogging bestie, now in podcast form, and this is your safe space for real talk, feel-good chats, and honest moments you won't always find on camera. Whether it's life behind the lens, little joys that get us through, or the things we don't usually say out loud, we're talking about it here. So, get comfy and let's get into it. Welcome to the fifth and final episode of the Stay Happy podcast series. I'm your host, Jack Forrest Rickard, and today's episode is unlike any other we've done so far. This isn't just a conversation, it's a raw, powerful account of surviving cruelty, overcoming trauma, and turning unimaginable pain into purpose. When I first read Lauren's story, it stopped me in my tracks. It's honest, it's painful, it's full of heart, but above all, it's inspiring. Lauren has been through things no one ever should, yet here she is, standing tall, helping others, and raising a son with the kind of love and strength only someone who's walked through fire can offer. I'm so proud to say Lauren is our first ever guest on the podcast, and I can't think of a more meaningful way to close this series than by giving space to a story like hers. I received a letter from someone called Lauren, and it wasn't just a letter I read and moved on from, it was one that sat with me. There was something in the way she wrote, the honesty, the hurt, the quiet strength behind every sentence. I could feel how much she needed to say what she said. So I reached out to Lauren and asked if she'd like to come on here. Not to perform, not to explain, but simply to speak her truth. Because that's what this space is about, giving people a place to be heard, without interruption, without judgment, and without shame. So, before we hear from Lauren, I'm going to read out the letter that she sent to me. I didn't really fit in at school. In many ways, I was an old soul, so think I always felt older than my peers. I was picked on throughout my primary school and left out of things, but it was never really bad. I never had a group to hang out with and tended to be friends with other outsiders. But as I moved into secondary school, this got worse. I was never physically bullied, but this is when the emotional bullying really kicked in. Mind games, people who I thought were my friends would bitch about me behind my back and come up with things to tell me deliberately designed to make me question reality, or they would do things and blame it on me. I remember on a certain day of the week, they would gather around me to tell me everything they hated about me. That specific part, guys, really hurt me reading that. They made me feel like no one else would ever like me, so I didn't try to make other friends. They told me I looked like a man and told people I was really a man pretending to be a woman, all because I wore my hair up one day and they thought it made me look manly. It took me 10 years to ever wear my hair up again. I couldn't win, no matter what I did. Everything I did was wrong. I'd go into school terrified of what the day would bring. When I tried to make other friends, they would tell them lies about me so they didn't want to be my friends anymore. I felt completely trapped, like my only option was to try to keep being friends with these people, because that was better than having nobody. This went on for about 3 years until eventually somehow I managed to make friendships that they didn't destroy, and I moved away from them. But the impact stayed with me. I was an anxious wreck, my self-esteem was rock bottom, and I became scared of the world. Fast forward to university, and in my first year I lived with the most awful people in my student accommodation. One person in particular was horrific. He would come into my room and spit on my things and myself. One time he came back drunk and forced his way into my room and held me down and urinated on me. Most of the other people I lived with did nothing. They knew what he was doing and sometimes even encouraged him. The girls would leave me out of things and encourage others to be unkind to me. One time they encouraged a random man on a night out to try to sexually assault me. Thankfully, they didn't manage to, as I ran away. The other boys actually were quite nice to me when the ringleader and the girls weren't around, but would openly say to me they couldn't be seen to be my friend, because otherwise they would be turned on to. Finally, my long-term boyfriend betrayed my trust and shared intimate pictures of me online. That was the final straw. Soon after, something in my brain snapped and I started to suffer with the most awful, intrusive thoughts. Every waking moment of my day, my brain would bombard me with debilitating, intrusive thoughts that made me scared to leave my room. Some days I didn't eat because I felt like I couldn't leave my room to go and get any food. I then developed mental rituals I had to start doing to try and make the thoughts go away. Of course, it only made them worse. I tried counselling, but it didn't really work, as the counsellor, lovely as they were, didn't really understand what was going on, so couldn't offer me anything that would help. In desperation, I spent hours Googling trying to find things that matched what I was experiencing because I truly believed I was going mad. Back in 2007, 2008, there just wasn't the information we have now. Then I stumbled upon a psychologist who was speaking about a type of OCD called pure O. Before this, I had, like most people, presumed OCD was counting and cleaning and flicking light switches, etc. But pure OCD that is purely thought-based and doesn't involve any physical compulsions was exactly what I was experiencing. Awful intrusive thoughts followed by mental compulsions trying to stop them. In that moment, my life changed. I suddenly knew what was going on. In time, I came to learn that I had been traumatized by the bullying I'd experienced in school, and then when I had been assaulted and bullied again in university. My brain essentially had enough and developed this OCD as a way to try and deal with it. I had developed trauma-induced OCD. I'm pleased to say that although it took many years to master it, I no longer suffer with OCD, which is absolutely amazing, I must say. There have been points over the last 10 years where I've felt it trying to creep back, normally when I experience something that triggers me back to those dark days. But I now have the tools to see it before it gets too big and deal with it quickly, to the point I can say it doesn't really feature in my life at all. Due to my experience, I became a therapist who specialises in OCD. I don't want anyone to ever suffer like I did, feeling like they were going mad and not knowing what the hell was going on in their head. It is truly a joy to work with people at their lowest point and see them transform to a point they can say they no longer have OCD. It is an awful illness and not something to be taken lightly or joked about because you like your dishwasher loaded in a certain way. In hindsight, back when I was at school, I wished I'd known that it was never about me. Hurt people hurt people. They were hurting me because they were unhappy in their own lives, and when I look back, that seems so obvious. But at the time, I really felt I was subhuman. I feel like if I'd known that, it might have changed things. What has come out of it, though, is I'm now extremely emotionally strong. I can truly handle anything, because when you've spent years of your life being attacked by your own brain and survived it, not only does it help you put things into perspective, it means you know you can get through tough times. I'm now married with a newborn son, funnily enough called Jack, and I hope to raise him to be a positive influence on the world and to look for people like myself when he's at school and be kind to them, because that can be the difference in someone's life. Before we dive into the questions, I just want to take a moment to properly introduce Lauren. She's someone who has not only survived some incredibly dark and difficult experiences, but has used that pain to help others, turning it into purpose, compassion, and strength. Lauren is now a therapist specialising in OCD, a proud new mum, and someone I know will inspire you just as much as she's inspired me. Lauren, thank you for being here. Welcome. Let's start at the beginning. What was your experience like at school, and when did things start to shift from feeling like you didn't fit in to truly feeling unsafe?
Pleasure to be here. It's very outside my comfort zone to do something like this, but we're going to do it anyway because I'm going to practice what I preach. I think I was quite aware from early on in primary school that I didn't really fit in. I never really knew why, but it was clear from how I didn't really have a sort of a friendship group, and I'd sort of go between people when I'd be left out of things. There was some teasing and mean comments, but that's as far as it went. And I think that's a common experience for many in primary school. I wouldn't have called it bullying, and I didn't really feel unsafe, but it was my first memorable experience of not feeling good enough or like I didn't belong. The shift to feeling unsafe came with the early years in secondary school. I never felt physically unsafe because the bullying wasn't physical, but it was emotionally unsafe. And, you know, people always say that thing when you're little that sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me. But actually, words can be extremely hurtful. And it became specifically targeted and cruel at that time. So I'd say it was the feeling of being preyed on, like I was being hunted by people. They would seek me out to do these things to me that made me feel unsafe.
I always say that about that phrase, you know, words will never hurt me, but actually sometimes I feel they hurt more.
Yeah.
You know, obviously nothing is good to experience, but words stick with you. And if someone's saying certain things enough, you start to believe them yourself, I think.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
And obviously reading what you sent me before we arranged this, I could see that it did go on to affect you more and more. And I obviously you just mentioned that you didn't feel that it was bullying, but I guess it was emotional bullying, especially that you faced in secondary school. So how did that affect how you saw yourself at the time?
I think it really formed my concept of myself, because before then I hadn't really given myself much thought. I was just happy being me, being a kid and getting on with life and just enjoying myself. But that was a real turning point, and that's literally what formed my opinion of myself. When you hear every day, you know, what they used to say to me, like, you're ugly, you're fat, you look like a man, you have horrible hair, you're annoying, you talk too much, you're boring, no one likes you, etc., etc., every insult you could possibly think of. As you said, when you hear it over and over, you very quickly believe those things about yourself.
Yeah.
And it led me to second guessing myself all day in everything that I did. I couldn't focus on a conversation, I couldn't focus on anything I was doing, because my brain was constantly asking myself, does your voice sound stupid? Do you look stupid? Are you sitting in the wrong way? Are you speaking in the wrong way? Are you boring people? Are you annoying? And it turned me from being a happy child, I was a very happy, chill child, I had a lovely childhood, into an extremely self-conscious, anxious teenager who was scared of her own shadow. And looking back now, I see that that's the very early stages of developing those obsessive behaviours that came to be fully fledged OCD, because I'd already at that point started to develop ways of trying to escape from what was happening.
Yeah. It's almost like a trauma response, isn't it? So something that, you know, I didn't speak about in my video that I did about my PTSD was the fact that when I suffer with like an episode of that, OCD is actually a coping mechanism for myself. And you'll know yourself, it's not, you know, people often say, "Oh, I clean too much," things like that. That's OCD, but it comes more down to, like, you know, I'll check things 5 times, all things like that, because you're trying to reassure yourself that you're in a safe space. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, and the way that OCD works is essentially your brain is trying to keep you safe, but it tries to keep you safe in ways that don't really make sense. So, you know, something bad could happen to you, like what happened to you or what happened to me,
Yeah.
and you could develop an obsession about, as you say, cleaning or checking or counting, even though that's got nothing to do with the actual trauma that happened. But for some reason, your brain links that this thing that you're doing can somehow protect you or keep you safe.
It's like I'm looking in a mirror hearing you say those things. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
There was a powerful line that you wrote. It took me 10 years to ever wear my hair up again. Can you talk a bit about the long-lasting impact of those small but cruel comments that were made to you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think a day went by when I didn't ask myself, for example, when I was getting ready, if I looked feminine enough. I'd spend hours obsessively doing my hair, because my hair was something they really, really picked on me for. Didn't matter if it was straight, curly, up, down, whatever, it just wasn't good enough. So I'd obsess about every single strand, and I wouldn't be able to focus or enjoy any social situations, as I said, because I'd be obsessing over them and kind of reviewing them in my head whilst they were happening. So I couldn't even really take in what people were saying to me. And at the time, I was also starting to be interested in boys, and it still makes me cringe now, but I definitely became perhaps a bit over sexualized with them to compensate, because in
Yeah,
my mind, I felt that if boys liked me, then I
yeah,
couldn't be as bad as those girls were saying. Yeah, looking back, I kind of want to say to myself, oh no, you don't need to do that. But at the time, you know, as a young girl, teenager, you kind of think, oh, if boys like me, that will fix it. Um, and then that, of course, then led to, I'd call her like the ringleader,
yeah.
calling me kind of like a slut and a slag and all of those things. So, you know, that then led to more comments.
It's almost like I could almost see it. It was almost like they actually led you to that path. It was them that did that. You can see it. Like I could see what was happening, almost like they pushed you to seek that reassurance in other ways because you didn't get it from them. Do you know what I mean? It was
Yeah, yeah, and
cruel.
I think what I'd always experienced to that point, that would change later, but what I was experienced at that point is actually boys were actually always quite nice to me, and sometimes would even sort of stand up for me and sort of say, actually, that's enough, that's not fair.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just, I think it was about kind of seeking that gratification, but I think maybe also part of it was thinking, well, actually, if I can get boys on my side, maybe they'll protect me, because I went to an all girls school,
Right.
which
Yeah.
is an extremely kind of bitchy environment, as it is. So I think I kind of thought, well, if I can get some boys on my side, then maybe they will help me.
Yeah.
So I think that was part of it as well.
When you moved to university, obviously the bullying took on a different and even more disturbing shape. But how did that time affect your mental health and the sense of safety you felt?
That was absolutely the scariest time of my life. I felt emotionally and physically unsafe at that point. I was absolutely terrified of my own mind, because at this point, that's when the intrusive thoughts had become extremely severe. And I was away from home and I felt like I couldn't escape. I felt completely trapped, like a caged kind of animal. And I'd also started, my anxiety was so severe at that point that I'd also started experiencing dissociation, which, if people don't know, that's kind of when you start feeling like you're having an out of body experience, like you're not really you.
Yeah.
And at the time, I didn't know what that was, but it's incredibly frightening. It's absolutely terrifying. And I quite literally thought I was dying. I thought something was going on in my brain and that it was going to kill me. And the thing that often isn't realised is experiencing a mental health issue in itself can be traumatic, because the first time you experience it, you don't know what's going on, and the toll it takes on you can feed into the trauma itself. So I look back on that time and that really resonates me with future trauma, is actually often my brain goes back to that time and how terrified I was.
I just want to dive deeper into that out of body experience that you felt. What are you able to tell us more about that?
Yeah, so it's sometimes called depersonalization or dissociation, but it's basically when your body's in an incredibly heightened state of anxiety that you can kind of sometimes feel like, say for example, you're speaking, it kind of sounds like it's somebody else talking, and you become detached from yourself. So sometimes people can even experience looking down on their own bodies, or feeling like they're in a dream, or like they're moving their body or speaking in a certain way, and it's not them. It's almost like watching yourself through like a screen or something. It's a very odd experience. Or sometimes people can experience even sometimes hearing things or seeing things that aren't there, and it's just where your body is so anxious, it kind of takes you out of yourself to protect you. So sometimes people can also experience things and they'll say, I don't actually remember that, I blocked it out. And it's a similar mechanism. Your brain is just trying to protect you by taking you away from it.
It's really strange to hear you talk about that. And the reason why I asked you to dive deeper in that is because when I was a child, and I sometimes still get it to this moment now, I often will turn to a loved one or something and I will say, I feel like I'm in a dream world. It's almost like you're not here.
Yeah.
And I wonder since hearing that if that is that, and I just never realised it before.
Yeah, and the thing is, people always expect that it's going to happen right when you're in that heightened state of anxiety, but actually, it can happen even when you're feeling quite calm, but there's
Yeah.
been anxiety going on. So sometimes people say, "Well, yeah, but I wasn't feeling particularly anxious at that specific moment." But that's the thing with it; it doesn't always happen right in that moment. It can happen. Say, for example, the previous day you've been very anxious, and then the next day you might experience it.
You described the moment your brain, in your words, snapped and how intrusive thoughts took over. What was it like living in that space day after day?
I mean, I remember that day really vividly, and the only way I can describe it is it literally felt like an elastic band pinging in my brain, because that split second, the thoughts just flooded my brain. And as I said in answer to your previous question, it was just absolutely terrifying dealing with what the that guy was doing, and the girls that supported him, plus the battle with my own mental health and having flashbacks at the same time to school. It's hard to put it into words, but it literally felt like my brain was overheating. It just absolute just overwhelm. I felt dead, really, mentally kind of dead, just completely numb and dead. And I still don't know to this day how I got through it. And I do think, looking back, there are very large chunks of that time I don't actually remember. So I do think, going back to the sort of dissociation thing, I do think my brain blocked some of that out. And it wasn't until therapy a bit later that some of that came back. And it's like my brain had just completely shut it out until it was a safer space to be able to deal with it.
Yeah. So when you finally had a name for what you were going through, what did that moment mean to you?
It sounds dramatic, but it was the day my life changed. I was just Googling and Googling and Googling, trying to find out what this thing was, because nothing seemed to fit. All the descriptions I could find online, I was like, no, that's not quite it. And I started seeing a counsellor when I was at university, and they were lovely, but I think it was a bit sort of above their pay grade what I was experiencing, and they couldn't quite figure it out either. But I stumbled upon the work of Dr. Stephen Phillipson, who is a expert in OCD, and he actually was the one that came up with the term pure OCD to describe this type of OCD that was completely thought-based. And it was like someone had been sitting inside my brain and describing exactly what was going on. And in that moment, I knew that's what it was. And it was something that was happening to me, and it wasn't who I was. And I think that's the thing with mental health, is sometimes you can start to think this is just who I am. But in that moment, it helped me separate that, no, that's not who I am. This is just something I'm suffering with. And it was the first moment, I would say, when I felt like I could take my power back, and I'd found that missing puzzle piece that was trying to describe what was going on.
I can relate to that in so much. It's almost like, because you almost have a diagnosis for what you're feeling, it's almost like you can start to work on it, and you think, right, that makes sense. And obviously myself, who suffers from PTSD, I can almost feel those moments when they're starting to come back as well. And it's like, right, okay, how can I deal with this? And I have almost learned, as the years have passed, I've learned ways, like coping mechanisms, which I didn't know before, which obviously really helps. Can you relate to that in any way?
Yeah, so I mean, the thing I always feel with OCD and trauma, because they are quite similar, is I don't think you're ever completely free of it. I think
I
you'll have
agree.
periods of your life where you'll have years, even decades, but it's sort of always sitting there a little bit like a dormant volcano that sometimes just bubbles a little bit. And when you become skilled in managing your condition, you spot those bubbles and you can get on top of them before they erupt. And I think that's where the real skill in therapy comes from. And it's something that I always tell my patients with OCD is, look, this is something that probably will bubble up at certain points in your life. Sometimes expected periods, sometimes unexpectedly. But actually the key is being able to recognize that and go, oh, hang on, I think I know what's happening here, and getting on top of it. That's where the real skill comes.
I literally am agreeing with everything you're saying. And when I first got my diagnosis 10 years ago, when I finally got to a happy, good place again, I thought, right, that's it. Brilliant. Now my life moves forward. And little did I know that it would come back and then come back and then go and then come back. And it's only been really probably the last year or so that I've thought, this is something that I'm going to suffer with for the rest of my life. And that's okay. I'm not going to beat myself up over it. I'm just going to learn how I deal with it myself. I used to be really, really scared of it. And it is still really scary, but I'm going to have to just live with that. It's what makes me me.
And actually, talking about being scared of it, I think that's part of what grabs you, because part of OCD recovery is about learning, actually, rather than be scared of it, you kind of have to change your mindset towards it and almost be, actually, do you know what? If you want to come back, that's cool. I can deal with you.
Yeah.
Because being scared of it is part of what fuels the condition. So especially with OCD, it attacks what you fear the most. If you're scared of it, it kind of uses that as fuel. So it's kind of like you have to learn to take the attitude that, and it's the attitude that I take now. And actually, when it did come back the last time, I think it's probably a lesson that I hadn't fully learnt myself. And in a way, I'm grateful that the last bout did come back, because it allowed me to fully learn this lesson, which is, I don't care if you come back. You come back all you like. I can deal with you. And having that attitude towards it funnily enough, actually keeps it at bay, because it's not giving it the fear it needs to fuel it.
That is so true. That is so true. You mentioned that your OCD was trauma induced. Do you think enough people understand the connection between trauma and OCD?
Yeah, I think both trauma and OCD are very misunderstood. I mean, with trauma, people typically tend to think, it's sort of soldiers in war or being caught in a terrorist attack or a single event like an assault. And it can be, and it is for a lot of people. But what it more commonly is a chain of events or a long-term situation. And what happens is your brain kind of stores it up and stores it up and stores it up. And then what will normally happen is the kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back. And where you've stored all these singular events up or this long-term event up, it kind of becomes this one big thing. So, for example, it could be in what happened in my case, or it could be, for example, somebody who's been having a lot of hospital treatment for a certain condition and they've spent a lot of time in hospital, their health has been uncertain, and over time that just builds up and builds up and builds up. It was for me, it was the case of my experiences kind of all adding together to cause the trauma, so it kind of become a sum of all of those parts. So people probably would hear my story and think, well, that's not even that bad, what happened to me was worse. But you can't choose what your brain reacts to. All you can do is how you then deal with it from that point. So, with trauma and OCD, you tend to get the symptoms before you even realise. And that's when you have to go, okay, that's what I need to do something about. You can't do anything about your brain starting to feel those things. And with OCD, people typically think of, again, cleaning, counting, those typical physical compulsions that people
Yeah.
think of with OCD. But actually, the thought process and anxiety behind it is actually the biggest part. And in pure OCD, you don't have any physical compulsion. So you could live with somebody with pure OCD and not know anything was wrong because they're not doing any of the typical things you would associate with it. What they're doing is they're doing mental compulsions and mental checking. But in my opinion, trauma and OCD, they're incredibly similar. Both have triggering events that start off that trauma. So, for example, if you've experienced, say, an assault and the person who assaulted you was wearing a particular aftershave, years could go down the line and you walk down the street and you smell somebody wearing that aftershave, your brain remembers and it can trigger that off. And it's the same with OCD. If your OCD is around a particular theme or a particular action, again, where your brain makes these crazy links that don't even make sense, you could hear a particular song that was around at the time when you last had OCD, and your brain is trying to keep you safe and going, hey, do you remember that song? That song was on the last time you were in danger. You're hearing that song again. Does this mean you're in danger again? And it starts the process off. So that triggering mechanism in both of them are very similar, and both involve those strong kind of mental symptoms such as unwanted thoughts, images, flashbacks, and even experience. As I said earlier, experiencing trauma and OCD in themselves can be traumatizing just because of how severe the experience is. So it kind of, you can also become re-traumatized just from experiencing the trauma, if that makes sense.
It really does. And the part that stuck with me was the fact you said that, not everything OCD related is physical. That person will be battling in their own mind. And I often say to people, I've had a conversation over 10, 11, 12 times before I've even raised it with somebody else. So a lot of mine comes from, often over the years, have silenced myself when I don't necessarily agree with something because I'm frightened of the results and I'm frightened of feeling guilty for speaking up, really, when I should have done. And I've really been working on that a lot recently, and it's something I almost kick myself for, because it's almost like I should have done that so many years ago, because it's when you speak a part of your truth, you're not digging at someone else, you're just telling them how it made you feel, and it really makes you feel lighter for sharing that.
Yeah, and your episode, sorry to interrupt, your episode about actually, if it's your truth and people are uncomfortable with that, then
Yeah.
that's kind of their problem. And I think what you just said then really resonates with me, because I've thought, just on the off chance that any of these people that did these things to me heard this and realized it was me.
Yeah.
And I kind of thought, oh, well, do I want them to hear that? And I thought, well, They did it.
Yeah.
If they don't want to hear it, they shouldn't have done it.
You now help others as a therapist specialising in OCD. What is it like being on the other side of that struggle, guiding people through their darkest moments?
It's just a beautiful thing to be part of, to meet somebody for the first time when they're trapped in despair and fear, and you know exactly how they're feeling, although you don't professionally, you don't share that with them. You can feel it and you know exactly where they're coming from, and the way that their soul just seems to become lighter as they start to understand it, and the way that their brain works, and that they understand that actually this is very treatable and that there is hope. To see them starting to take their power back and becoming the master of their own brain, and finally saying goodbye at the end of therapy because they don't need it anymore, to assist somebody in giving them their life back is just a privilege. But I always say to them, I'm a very little part of this. All I am doing is helping you to understand what your brain's doing and why, and giving you the tools with which to get better. But actually, you're the one that's going out there every single day, day in, day out, using those tools and fighting back. So actually, the praise is on you because you're the one that's done it. But it's a great gift that you can give to somebody. And I think that kind of motivated me to become a therapist, because I didn't want anybody to go through what I did and have that time of being so in despair and feeling like you were dying and there was something wrong with you, and feel like you were losing your mind, and to not know where to turn. I don't want anybody to experience that. I want anyone to know that there is hope and it can get better.
That's so true. And I think anyone that does experience these things, all you want in life is to be happy and for others to be happy as well. And obviously that was where I wanted to go with obviously my own journey as well. So I can really relate to that. It's not about anything other than wanting to help others and make them feel less alone, because you know as a person how lonely it can feel. And just, I don't know about you, but I wish that when I was going through what I was going through, I had a voice that almost spoke to me and understood. And I think you as a therapist, that is absolutely amazing, and you're giving people that outlet to use. You said something beautiful, that what's come out of everything is a deep emotional strength. What advice would you give to someone who is currently in that storm, thinking they won't make it through?
It's a hard one to answer, because when you're in that dark place, you just don't believe it can get better, and you hear people saying these sort of words of wisdom or encouragement, and you just don't believe it. But I suppose some wisdom that I've picked up on the way is to hold on to the knowledge that who you are before this happened is still in there. They can never be destroyed. It's buried under everything else that's going on. You'll get what I used to call moments of clarity, when for a few minutes it would let go of me and I'd feel like myself before it would kind of grab me and pull me back under again. And those moments, however fleeting, are the real you, and reminding you that you're still in there. And if you throw yourself into working on getting better, those moments become more frequent and they last longer until you feel fully yourself again. And that dark place seems like a distant memory. And keeping in mind also that recovery isn't a straight line upwards. You will have dips on the way. Rather than thinking that you're back to square one, you have to accept that actually this is just part of a dip. You get back up and you carry on. And it sounds cheesy, but something that does actually work, I find, and it's something I still do, is gratitude, and kind of trying to find the perspective in things. So finding something, however small, that has been a positive. So it could be something like you really enjoyed your lunch, or the coffee you had was really nice, or the weather's nice today. And it just helps tip that scale a bit from everything being awful to actually, despite the awfulness, there has been something good in the day, or some light in the day, that's brought me joy. And it just takes that edge off a little bit. And it's not saying that that's secure and that's all that you've got to do. It's just one little tool in your toolkit that you can use. And for me personally, I found that really helpful. So one of mine was just being grateful that I was alive that day, because it was another day that I got to fight back and get stronger. And I still practice it daily. Like you, I live for my holidays. That's my happy place. That's where I am most happy. So in rubbish times, I try and visualize that one day I will be on holiday, happy as can be, and this dark day, I'll be looking back on that like it's a distant memory. And that's what I work towards, like it's my motivation. And there's been lots of, not great things that have happened since, because that's life. Sometimes life throws rubbish at you. And that's always kind of got me through it. And I genuinely believe that one of the hardest battles you can ever face is the one against your own mind. So if you can get through that, everything else is a piece of cake. And I've genuinely found that when difficult things do happen in life, completely unrelated to the trauma and OCD, actually, I've kind of thought, you know what, I've been through worse. I've been through this battle. I can get through this. This is a piece of cake in comparison. So in a weird way, awful as it's been, it's made me so much stronger mentally and so much more able to deal with things that I perhaps wouldn't have been able to deal with had I not gone through it.
I completely agree with you with finding something, no matter how small that it might be. Mine's a morning coffee, or, you know, a TV show that's coming out, or my safe space. I was often laughed about when I was growing up because of it, because it was my obsession. But I can't remember if I've spoken about it previously, probably not. But I really was drawn to Britney Spears, and it was more than just a pop star. For me, it was, I could see something in her that I could see in myself, and I could see that she was hiding pain, and I felt almost connected to her. And I was often taunted because, you know, you're obsessed with her, things like that. But she was my safe space.
Yeah.
And I think as I've grown up, you know, I've changed that. It's, you know, as you say, the holidays, the travel, things like that. But one thing I've really tried to build is to rely on myself. I want to rely on myself before I rely on anyone else, because
100%, yeah.
do you know what? If you know in yourself that you can make yourself happy, then anything else is a bonus. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I always like to use the analogy that when you go on a plane and they say, you know, in the case of depressurization, the oxygen masks will fall, and, you know, to put yours on before you put anyone else's on. And it's a great analogy really for life, in that you've got to make sure you're okay, because if you're not okay, no one else in your life, you know, you can't look after anybody else in your life, you can't love anybody else in your life, you know, properly and to your full ability, unless you're doing okay. And actually, whatever happens, you've only got you in life. You know, unfortunately, people do leave us, whether that's through death or betrayal or whatever, or they just, you know, go out of our lives. So actually, you are the only person that you can rely on. So you need to invest in yourself, because you are you, and you're with you for the rest of your life.
I love that, actually. And I always say to my mum, but in a different way, I always say to her, you've got to look after you, mum, because how are you going to look after... So my granddad, he's not very well right now, but I often say to her, you know, how are you going to look after granddad if you're not looking after yourself before? And it's not in a selfish way, but it's, you need to be the best version of you to then give the best version of you to others, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
So I want to end these questions on a really lovely note. And you're now a mum to your beautiful newborn son, Jack. Love the name, obviously. What are the values you hope to pass on to him, especially when it comes to kindness and the resilience that you've got?
I mean, it feels like he's been born into a world that's kind of worse than ever in some ways. It just feels like it's a really depressing place to be. And I just want him to be a positive light in it. I want here to teach him to be the master of his own emotions and resilience, because if he can master that, then that's going to set him up for life. And to know that life is tough, but actually he is tougher and he can genuinely get through anything. I want him to be kind and notice those who might need someone to be nice to him, whether nice to them even, whether that's humans or animals, and to not mistake being kind with being a pushover. And I think that's a mistake we often make, that, well, in order to be kind, I have to sacrifice my own boundaries. And I definitely will teach him to be assertive and have his boundaries and not put up with people treating him badly, because I wish I'd had that. And finally, that he is enough just as he is, despite what people might say to him, because it's taken me a long time, and probably many people go through their entire lives without realising it, that actually you are enough just as you are. And sometimes you're not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but as long as you're your own cup of tea, you know, that's fine. And you will find your tribe, and you will find the people who do like you for you.
I love that. Thank you. And Lauren, thank you truly for trusting us with your story, your honesty, your strength, and your willingness to speak so openly will stay with everyone who's listened today. I know it will help more people than you can even imagine. And do you have any final words you'd like to share with our listeners today?
Sometimes something that I've kind of kept in mind when things have been tough is the saying, it's a bad day, it's not a bad life. And sometimes it's going to be more than a bad day. It might be a bad week, a bad month, a bad year. But actually, it doesn't mean that it's going to be that way forever. And you have to reach out and find that support. But it's easier said than done, isn't it? Because sometimes services are lacking, or you don't have people in your life who can support you. But there is so much out there. Even on Google, there's so many good resources that you can use as sort of self-help. But it kind of goes back to, I suppose, your stay happy message, is that it's not about pretending that bad things don't happen, or that pushing them away, or pretending like everything's fine. It's about understanding that bad things do happen and times do get tough, but actually within that you can still choose to find joy, and you can still choose things to make you happy, or choose a lesson to take from it. And I think when you do that and you turn to that adversity and find something positive from it, however bad it might be, you reclaim your power, and then it doesn't feel so bad.
I just want to say well done for coming on here, sharing your story with everyone. It is so brave, and I know how hard it is to share a side of you. It makes you feel vulnerable. It makes you feel a little bit helpless in a way, but you should feel so strong now. Truly, thank you for coming on.
You're welcome.
Guys, as we close this episode and this series, I just want to say this. We've covered a lot over these 5 episodes. Pain, healing, joy, growth, truth. But if there's one thing I hope you carry forward, it's this. You are not what happened to you. You are who you chose to become. Whether you're still in your storm or you've just stepped out of it, the sun will rise again, and sometimes, even when it doesn't feel like it, you are doing better than you think. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for being part of this journey with me. Thanks for listening to the Stay Happy podcast. I hope today's episode gave you something to smile about, think about, or feel seen in. If it did, share it, tag me, and let someone else feel a little bit lighter too. This space is all about real life with a little JFR sparkle. Until next time, stay positive, keep talking, and of course, stay happy.